Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu has taken to Twitter. Doesn't matter what Elon Musk wants to call it, really, does it? It's always going to be Twitter to us. And he's done so seemingly because it's finally dawning on him that he's lost the narrative and the global protection and the media that Israel has got used to enjoying, and the convincing of people that Israel are the good guys and everybody attacking them is not. And he's lashing out at anyone and anything he thinks is out to get him now, and basically thinks otherwise as eyes are being opened across the world. Well, Western leaders in the US, the UK and the EU are still fawning all over him, of course. Others around the world, and certainly ordinary citizens around the world, aren't having a bar of it. He knows his own political survival depends on keeping this going, which means after Gaza, there will have to be somewhere else. There will always have to be another enemy he will have to target to remain in post. But his Twitter tirade will have hopefully gone some way towards ensuring his reign is nearing its end sooner rather than later. Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu has had a little tizzy on social media. He has. And it's not gone well for him at all things considered, because the hypocrisy of what he's mouthed off about has been lost on literally nobody. This is centred around him essentially picking a fight with the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, himself not exactly a shining beacon of great leadership, tolerance or democracy. He's been a monster to the Kurdish people in Turkey and Syria, and is in many ways little different to Netanyahu. The thing is, Netanyahu attacking him is likely only to cause himself and Israel more harm, not only reputationally, but economically as well. So how did this spat between these two despots start then? Well, it really does say something. It really comes to something that when someone as awful himself as Erdogan is thinking that your actions make you an absolute piece of shit, you know you're in trouble, doesn't it? But that is where we are. Erdogan gave a speech which, when was translated into English, said, "For 80 days we've watched all of humanity's values be killed before our very eyes. We watched Israel's Nazi camps in the stadiums, right? What is this? How are you different from Hitler? They'll make us long for Hitler. Is there anything different in Netanyahu's actions compared to Hitler's? No." Very strong words, very strong language, but nothing that a lot of commentators on social media haven't already been saying to one extent or another. The Hitler comparisons, as uncomfortable as they might be making a lot of people, have stuck. They've stayed around. And a lot of the imagery seen has reminded people of scenes from World War II. Erdogan himself drew attention to what he called Nazi camps in the stadiums. And indeed, this has been one of the bigger stories over the seasonal period, where we have seen what many media outlets are calling men, but which definitely also include children, if you look carefully at the pictures, being stripped to their underwear and gathered in stadiums. And this is not dissimilar to, for example, the Veldiv roundup of Jews in 1942 in Paris by the Nazis and Vichy France, or later even in 1973 by Pinochet in the Santiago Stadium in Chile. The former example, just one of that time, which bears out Erdogan's comparison, no matter how uncomfortable that might make you feel. A stadium turned into a detention centre, a concentration camp within the concentration camp, which is the Gaza Strip anyway. Well, Netanyahu didn't much like this, as you can imagine, even if the boot might fit. He came out in a tweet attacking Erdogan, saying, "Erdogan, who is committing genocide against the Kurds and who holds the world record for imprisoning journalists who oppose his regime, is the last person who can preach morality to us. The IDF, which is the most moral army in the world, is fighting to eliminate the most abhorrent and brutal terrorist organisation in the world, Hamas-ISIS, which has committed crimes against humanity and which Erdogan has praised and whose leaders he hosts." Now, firstly, Netanyahu has a point here. Turkey shares a large southern border with Syria, and a genocide of the Syrian Kurds by him and his forces are well documented. It is all a bit rich coming from Erdogan, these comments about Netanyahu and what he is doing in Gaza, but at least someone is actually saying it, and that's saying a lot right now. Erdogan has copped a lot of flack from Western leaders, but Israel never does it? So there's hypocrisy. Israel is coveted and protected and placed on an altar where nobody may dare criticise them. So in that context, it is a good thing someone has said this and called him out. It's just a case of if only it wasn't him. But equally, Netanyahu's retaliation is peak hypocrisy as well. He attacked Erdogan for imprisoning journalists when his forces in Gaza have killed over 100 of them, because the IDF does not discriminate very much in its targets. Yes, the IDF, that most moral army in the world. Really? 100 dead journalists, hospitals no longer functional, the soldiers bragging about who they've killed down to kids and babies in video clips on social media that make you sick. Babies have to die in incubators, medical charities and humanitarian aid agencies targeted by them, UN staff killed by them, UN schools destroyed by them, and every time they are pulled up on any of this, Hamas is always the excuse, is it not? Well, Hamas weren't around before 1987 when Israel had already stolen land and settled occupied territory and were killing Palestinians then. So what was the excuse then before Hamas, eh? The IDF are amoral terrorists doing the dirty work for a despot clinging to power as he becomes more and more reviled, not just around the world, but by his own people too. Netanyahu, let's not forget, whilst he's so offended by Hitler comparisons, once said himself of Hitler that he never wanted to kill the Jews, but the Muslims made him. He is on record as having said that Hitler only wanted Jews expelled from Europe, but that instead the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem told him to burn them. That was back in 2015. He actually did get some criticism for that, for once. But picking a fight with Erdogan, no matter what he's saying, isn't necessarily the wisest choice for a country with few friends in its immediate vicinity. For example, 41% of Israel's oil comes from Azerbaijan by way of Turkey. 65% of Israel's steel comes from Turkey too. Can Netanyahu afford to alienate his nation further by risking a trade dispute over some name-calling with Turkey's president? More than anything, though, by putting his retaliation out onto social media, especially the bird site, where people react very quickly. The condemnation of his and Erdogan's actions came thick and fast and brutally on point. Here's a few examples. Pastor Ben said, "Let's be real, you and Erdogan are both a part of the global ethno and religious nationalist regime. Nevertheless, your barbarity towards children exceeds all others today." Paul Patrick said, "Yes, Netanyahu did say the IDF, which is the most moral army in the world. He said that with a straight face, while the same IDF has murdered thousands of Palestinian children and continues to do so on a daily basis. A war criminal standing over Israeli war crimes." And Dr. Sarah Kadir said, "As a Kurd, I do not appreciate that the suffering of my people is used as propaganda for the heinous crimes the Israeli fascists have perpetrated against the people of Gaza. It does not be used as an excuse to deflect from his actions. The majority of Kurds are as outraged as the global community at the systematic and brutal attacks against innocent civilians and the silence of the international community. The Palestinians suffer as we have and continue to suffer. We Kurds have a special tie with the Palestinian cause. Those lands were liberated by Salah al-Din, a Kurd. He is celebrated amongst most of our people and is a source of pride. I must also say that Erdogan must practice what he preaches and stop the bombing of our Kurdish lands and people. Long live the cause for justice and freedom." Both of these men are truly awful people. That they are picking on each other right now, yes, is amusing, but also shows how sensitive both are to what they're doing and the accusations at each other thereof. Yet, when one of them is one of just a handful of world leaders actually calling out the genocidalist in Israel overseeing the destruction being conducted in Gaza right now, it really does say something for just how rubbish most world leaders right now are on this, not least our own. Perhaps Turkey will impose some sanctions of its own if this goes on much longer. Hypocrisy to be sure, given who their leader is and how he acts. But they are in a position to inflict some hurt economically and give Netanyahu a bigger headache than mere words ever could. After all, Erdogan would only need to look at the sanctions Yemen are imposing, and if you want to know how much that is crippling Israel right now, then you really do need to watch this video next, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.